Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of the chapter 2 lecture for today. So we left off talking about the organizations that issue communication mandates. Next, we're going to look at some ethical perspectives. Look at page 27. There is a box on there. When we talk about the American Nursing Association Code of Ethics, those are listed there in that box on page 27. So I'll let you look through those on your own. Please read through each of them so that you understand. The big thing to remember is that this Code of Ethics, the ANA, it establishes principled guidelines that are designed to protect the integrity of clients related to their care, health, safety, and rights. And it provides ethical guidelines for nurses to protect those client rights. And that's right, I take that right out of your textbook, so you can look at that. But that's the purpose of the Code of Ethics. And then if you look at page 27 in that box, it shows you all of the guidelines that are listed there. Resolution of ethical dilemmas, that's the other thing, is that if we have some ethical dilemmas that arise within our practice, we need to be able to resolve them, and we need to use ethical ways of doing that. So it also helps guide us with that. Legal standards, we have different types of laws: statutory laws, civil laws, and criminal laws. Statutory laws, those are legislated laws, so they're drafted and enacted at the federal or the state level. Some specifics that deal with statutory laws are things in regards to Medicare, our Nurse Practice Act, and know that every state has their own Nurse Practice Act. Civil laws, these are the ones that are developed through court decisions. They're created by precedents rather than written statutes. So if something happens and it sets a precedent for future nursing practice, that's where we would see that come into play. This has to do with professional duty as a nurse. And then the last one is criminal laws. And these are reserved for cases where there is intentional misconduct or a serious violation of our professional standards of care. I wanted to ask this question in class and see what you think. Guess what the most common violation of professional standards is? I'll let you think about it a second. Well, guess what? It's failure to renew your nursing license. So some people forget to renew their license and they're practicing at work. They're doing their duties. They're practicing as a registered nurse, but they actually don't have a license to do so. So that is the one that is the most common. All right, risks in the nurse-client relationship. Look at page 29 in your textbook. There's a full list there. A few of these that we pulled out that are important are breaching confidentiality. Confidentiality, we know, is supreme in everything. It's very, very important. It even looks at providing privacy for a patient. You all had health assessment, and when you were assessing your partners in lab, we even pulled the curtains for things so that we could keep that privacy. So breaching confidentiality, abuse. We hear a lot about elder abuse in nursing homes. Inappropriate delegation, so asking someone or telling someone to do a duty that is not appropriate for them to do. I have a quick story about that. I worked for a doctor once. Well, I worked in this clinic, and we had a doctor and a patient who lived close. This was an outlying clinic, and a patient who lived close to the clinic where I was at that day had a PICC line for, she was receiving chemotherapy, and she needed to have her PICC line flushed on a weekly basis, and she didn't want to have to go all the way to the hospital to have it done when we were right there. Well, there are really a lot of rules about how to flush a PICC line. Even I would not be qualified to flush a PICC line until I've practiced and had training and had marked off on the competency itself. And there was a medical assistant that was working with her, and she took this message, and I was kind of sitting back and listening, and the doctor said, "Oh, sure, tell them they can come here and we can flush it." Well, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, maybe this just needs to be flushed with sterile saline, and that is something that we have there, so the doctor maybe knows how to do that, and that's fine. However, what happened was the medical assistant told the patient and to come on in, and so she hung up, and she said to the doctor, "You're going to do the flushing?" And she said to the medical assistant, "Oh, no, you can do that." And I said, "Oh, no, that's not how this works. You have to go through proper channels." I said, "That is not a duty that a medical assistant is allowed to do." I said, "I'm allowed to do it as a registered nurse, but I am not comfortable doing it. I have not been competencied in it." So we ended up sending the patient to the hospital. But it was really hard because this particular doctor and I didn't always see eye to eye. We got along okay, but there was a lot of things that were questionable in my mind about the way some of her practice things were. And this was one of the things that I told you before. We have to be very able to talk to providers when we have questionable orders. So if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't been there that day, my guess is that medical assistant would have tried to flush the thing. I don't know. I would hope that she would know that that's not her role, or at least maybe would have called somebody and said, "I'm not exactly sure how to do this," and then they would have told her. But it really was a scary situation. So that's inappropriate delegation. Lack of documentation. If you didn't document it, it wasn't done. Practicing outside the scope of practice. So like I said, I, in my scope of practice, could flush a cath for a patient for an indwelling catheter. However, I was not comfortable with it. That would be outside my scope of practice. And of course, lack of due diligence. So that's where you actually are trying to do the right thing, and the lack of that. All right, applying ethical and legal guidelines. This starts on page 35. These are pretty simple ones. The client's right to privacy. HIPAA really reflects everything with that. I don't think we need to go into that too much because you've had that. The Joint Commission also has privacy regulations. And then, of course, we have an ethical responsibility to maintain patient privacy. So that's where I told you that even pulling the curtains in our classroom was showing how we maintain patient privacy. But it also goes along with knowing that we aren't going to say anything to anybody. It's really important for you to remember that if you work in a facility like I do, that's a very small facility, and it comes in a small town, you're going to know everybody. And they're going to know you, and they're going to say, "Oh, tell Joe, your husband, that I said hi." Well, I can't even do that because then I acknowledge that they were in the clinic that day. Now, Joe doesn't know that I'm saying that they were in the clinic and that's where they said it. It could have been down at the local Quick Trip that I saw him, but it's still best not even to say that. Confidentiality, we've talked about this numerous times. Don't really need to say a whole lot more. Providing only the information needed to provide care for the client to other health professionals on a need-to-know basis. So we would give, if you have a patient that needs to have physical therapy, and maybe they have to have speech therapy, and maybe they have to have lab work done, or so all these different areas of the hospital have to come in and interact with this patient. We'll give each of those areas the information that they need so that they can effectively do their job, but we'll only give them what they absolutely need. So just giving them on an as need to know. If someone comes up to you and says, patient so-and-so I heard has been admitted, and that's usually the doctor that I work for, that's their patient. Can you tell me what they were admitted for? That's not a need to know basis, because that doctor probably already knows why that patient is in. They could go to the doctor and ask as the nurse and say, I wondered why Mrs. Smith was admitted to the hospital. We just saw her the other day. And then the doctor could legally share that within the confines of the clinic. But otherwise, it's only on an as need to know. It includes release of information, unwanted visitation, so not letting people come into the hospital if the patients don't want visitors. Public discussion of patients, as we've already talked about. Pictures without consent is huge. Pictures are becoming a bigger part of nursing care. As a wound care nurse, we actually use a little looks like a phone handheld device that takes pictures and uploads those pictures into the patient record. So our patients automatically kind of sign a blanket statement when they start wound care that we may be taking pictures, because it's the best way to document a wound. And then sharing of any identifiable data. So this goes back to where we said to you that even putting your partner's name in lab on your write-ups is breaking their confidentiality. So, all right, this is another thing that you can read through. As a student nurse, you observe a fellow nursing student making a medication error. She is a good friend of yours and is visibly upset by her error. She also is afraid that if she tells the instructor, she could get a poor grade for clinical, and she needs to have a good average to keep her scholarship. The client was not actually harmed by the medication error, and your friend seems sufficiently upset by the incident to convince you that she would not make a similar error again. So think about this on your own. What would you do? I know what I would do. I would still let the instructor know. I would also let the charge nurse know, because there was no harm done, but there could potentially have been harm done. So it's an event that we need to report. It doesn't mean that the person's gonna flunk, doesn't mean that the person's going to get dismissed. I've had this happen before. Even me, I have made medication errors. It's a way to learn. When you make those errors, you learn from those mistakes. So it's really important that we follow through with that and make sure that we know that it is our duty to report those types of events. All right, mandatory reporting for many different things, usually centers around sexually transmitted diseases, abuse, if you suspect any abuse like child abuse or elder abuse, or there's any potential for harm. You are legally required to report it. It does vary among the states, but in Wisconsin, we are required to report any of these things. Informed consent process. Clients have to be educated about the procedure and other alternatives. They have to be able to deliberate, so they have to be able to ask questions and see what other options there are available. And they have to cognitively be able to understand this, and if they want, more information, they have to be able to ask for that. They also have to be competent to provide consent. So if we deem them that they're not mentally competent, then they can't provide the consent for that particular procedure. Now, there are a lot of variables with this. If a person is in a life-threatening situation, an emergent situation, and they're unable to provide informed consent, and there's no one around also to do it, like say they had a tragic accident and we're providing medical care, that's different. Those types of things are okay to provide care in those situations. So, summary of this chapter: guidelines exist to guide appropriate communication within the healthcare arena. Make sure you read through all of those guidelines that we have in the chapter that we've gone over, and you understand them, and if you have questions on them, please let me know. It's going to change from time to time. We're going to see updates. We're going to see changes to these guidelines. Every state may even be different. Every area and every facility may be a little bit different. So always know your facility's policies. Just because it says you can do it through guidelines doesn't mean that you can in every facility. All right, have a wonderful day.